Hello, and welcome back to another Ring of Pain items tier list video. So today we are going to be going over the glove slot, or the hand slot, which I'm pretty excited for. There's a lot of items within this slot that I really enjoy. They tend to mix up the gameplay a bit, so I'm excited to get into these. So to start us off, we have First Strike. First Strike is something that has kind of grown on me. I used to undervalue it a little bit simply because I never really valued speed all that much. However, it can be definitely pretty helpful in the early game. So, First Strike's passive reads, your first attack each dungeon is a crit. So, being as it's your first attack, not your first turn, you can save this crit for basically the first enemy that you strike. So if you'd like to move around the room, find the highest health enemy or the enemy that it will do the most damage to. You can kind of use that to eliminate early threats, especially in the early rounds, or the early depths, I should say. So this item definitely has some solid value to it. The extra speed is definitely nice in the early game. The negative clarity hurts a little bit because that does take away from your healing, or I should say it doesn't add to your healing at all. And obviously soul economy is pretty low in the early game, but pretty solid overall. I would say, as far as where this actually goes on the tier list, I'm almost tempted to put it A, because I feel as though it is pretty solid, and if you keep this into the mid-game to potentially late game, that first crit can still hold its value pretty well. So I think I'm going to leave that at A to start. We may move it around, but kind of it's where my gut's telling me. Alrighty, so next item is Grabby Hands. So Grabby Hands is definitely kind of polarizing. The stats on it are pretty good. 1 attack, 1 speed, 1 clarity. All decent stuff. A little bit of extra crit chance, which we could go either way on. It doesn't really add a whole lot to the item. But the main aspect to this item is its passive, which equip all items found, gain the soul cost of replaced items. So basically how this item works is, as you move through the depths of Ring of Pain, it will auto-equip items that are like free loot that you just find in the ring, right? So if there's a scroll, or if there's just a random blue item that spawns in your ring, it'll automatically equip it. And also, if you are in a chest, like if you've opened up a chest with some options of items you can take, you cannot discard the chest, so you're forced to take an item. The benefit to, I guess, this passive is the fact that you gain the soul cost of replaced items, so it can be a way to produce a lot of souls, especially early on, since any items that you replace obviously will refund you all those souls. So it can be pretty decent. I tend to shy away from this item simply because I like to play as consistently as possible in terms of knowing what items I'm going to have when. So personally, I don't value this very high. I would probably say C tier. I mean, maybe it's B just because the stats are good and the souls can be pretty decent, but my gut's kind of telling me C tier, so I'm going to leave it there for now. Next item is Nightshade Wrap. So, Nightshade Wrap, I oftentimes, again, have trouble kind of picking it up too often simply because of the lack of defense. The negative defense in the early game definitely doesn't feel great. However, you can supplement that with other items and stat boosts, of course. The passive reads that you get plus 5% stealth chance, which is fine. There's not really like anything to say about that. I mean, it's 5% chance, so if your candle isn't already giving you any percent chance to stealth, it's pretty negligible. You do get the 2 speed and 2 clarity as well, so that does feed into some of those secondary stats such as stealth, which is increased with speed. So if you're going a higher speed build, this can be kind of nice to have in your pocket for a couple secondary stats, but overall it doesn't really hold a lot of value. I would probably put this, I think, at C as well. These Grabby Hands and Nightshade Wrap are kind of in the same realm for me. I could definitely see an argument for Grabby Hands being better simply because of the soul refund, but that will be kind of crushed by one of these other items. So The next item we have is Pain's Reward, which is definitely an interesting item. So Pain's Reward's passive reads, gain +3 max health if you have 5 or less health on dungeon exit. And it has -2 defense and -4 HP. So the thing that makes this item kind of tricky is the fact that you're losing your tankiness, while picking this up in both forms of defense and HP. So you'll be very squishy early on. However, you can rack up some max HP really quick with this item. Basically, you need to leave the dungeon. So any dungeon that you're in, when you exit the dungeon, if you have 5 or less health, you will gain 3 max health. So if you go through, let's say, your first 4 dungeons and you're under that 5 max health, you're going to get another, or that 5 current health, you'll gain 12 max health, which can pretty much set you into the mid game. I do find it kind of hard to pick up consistently simply because the cost to pick it up, being your defense and HP, is so high. However, it definitely does have its applications. It's tough to rank these because I feel like for the glove slot or for the hand slot, items are either really, really good and they're working for you, or they're just not so great and I would rather just a different white item. But I would say if we're talking about all runs, Pain's Reward is definitely pretty situational. I have a tough time recommending anything that's lowering your tankiness early on. So I kind of want to drop this down to C as well. It can be good. I just don't value it super high. And really, if I'm being honest, it's hard for me to not be biased for the hand slot because one of my favorite hand slots are our final white item being Soul Stealer. So Soul Stealer, despite its lack of defense, has, in my opinion, one of the better passives of any white item and a contender for one of the better soul economy passives in the game. So Soul Stealer's passive reads +3 souls on kill. So this needs to be a kill by your hands if, say, a Firebeat explodes or an Amalgam eats something or whatever. Any other way that you can collect souls besides actually killing the enemy yourself, you won't get those 3 extra souls. However, since you can pick this item up for free in a white chest at the expense of 2 defense, after your first couple rooms between stat boosts and other free chests, you should be able to make up for that lost defense, and you could essentially keep this item all game. The reason I see so much value in Soul Stealer is because with negative clarity being so impactful in many ways, and positive clarity also being good but sometimes tough to build into, this item alone can solve all of your soul economy problems. So between having low clarity or having a tough time, killing a whole bunch of enemies, being able to get those 3 extra souls on kill will, for some enemies, triple or anywhere between like double and triple their value. And for a lot of enemies, you're getting, plus 75%, plus 50% of their total soul value. So I oftentimes when I pick this up, I'll keep it the entire game if I don't have another way of generating a lot of souls. And it gets you into your mid game quicker because you have so many souls to spend on those blue chests that start showing up. So for me, Soul Stealer is probably an S item as far as the whites go. These C tier, there might be 1 or 2 that you could argue could go into B, but I'm pretty much picking up one of these gloves or nothing at all for the most part. So that's probably where I would put Soul Stealer for now. Or just straight up, that's where I would put Soul Stealer. I'll take Soul Stealer every single game because I can make up a couple points of defense, and the souls will allow me to pick up even more white chests if I wanted to spend some souls on them. So Soul Stealer's great. I would pick it up all the time. Next item is Cold-Blooded. So Cold-Blooded, passive on this reads, every 4 attacks freeze target. And that has, as it says in the passive, a 4 combat turn cooldown on it. It has -2 attack, 2 defense, and 1 speed. So the stats are kind of wishy-washy for me. I sometimes pick this up, I sometimes don't. There's other items that can do what its passive does better than it, and without dropping attack. So the negative attack is really what makes this kind of give or take for me. If I already have a fair amount of attack, then I'll pick it up because freeze is fairly strong. The defense does feel nice, and of course the speed I'm kind of impartial to. 1 point of speed, I'm not going to really cry over if I have to give it up, or if I do get it, it's not really going to change my world. So I'd say this item probably sits kind of middle of the line in B tier. It definitely does have function even into the late game. However, giving up that attack can kind of be tough, especially if this is your first blue you're picking. Alrighty, next item, Haggler's Gloves. So this is kind of a weird one for me as well, because the passive is actually really strong. However, the negative defense makes it tough to pick up sometimes. But the passive reads, item reroll costs are halved. So again, another soul economy benefiting item, I guess I could say, for lack of better words. Basically, anytime you reroll a chest, the cost of that reroll will go up. However, with Haggler's Gloves, it'll always be half of whatever the normal value is for that reroll. So especially once you start getting into legendaries, where the first reroll costs 20 and the second reroll costs 40 souls to reroll, this can save you a lot of souls if you're not finding the items you want. The only reason I find this kind of tough to pick up sometimes is because, again, with negative 2 points of defense, if this is one of the first blues you're running into, it can feel a little tough to give up that defense. However, I do think it's still a really solid item. I don't pick it up a whole lot. However, the passive mixed with a couple points of clarity can definitely give you some support in your soul economy if you need. So again, I'd probably put it kind of middle of the line at B. I won't pick it up every run, but it's solid if I have no other options and I'm worried about how many souls I'm going to be spending. So, next item, Hand of Dog. Hand of Dog is just plain and simple. It's just a stat stick that's basically all about healing and clarity. It has no passive. However, it kind of has a passive. So, Hand of Dog, I guess spoiler alert, fair warning, if you haven't used it before. But Hand of Dog will allow you to tame rot hounds, as well as pet any dogs that you find throughout the course of the run. So it does sort of take an enemy out of the ring if you happen to encounter a rat hound. If you are second to attack in the attack order, then you will still take an attack from that rat hound before it transforms. So something to keep in mind. But really what it comes down to are the stats. With 4 HP and 4 clarity, it's really easy pickup if you don't already have something in your hand slot. And it's just, there's no drawback to it. There's no cost for picking this up. It's just a solid item for the health and the clarity. Gives you a little extra tankiness, potentially a little extra soul economy in the early game if you're encountering this pretty, early into your run. So I'd say it's probably at A. I'll pick this up generally over both Haggler's Gloves and Cold-Blooded when I see it, just because the stats are so easy to slap onto any build. Alrighty, next item is Inner Fury. Inner Fury is an item I love. So, Inner Fury gives -1 attack and 3 speed, and the passive reads gain knockback. So that's just a permanent effect. It has no cooldown. So basically, every enemy that you attack will be knocked back 1 space around the ring. And the reason this is so effective is it allows you to create a lot more space for yourself regarding explosive enemies. So your fire beads, small and huge fire beads, can be attacked when they're in their explosive state or their explosive action, and it'll knock them back before they go to explode, which means obviously you can avoid the explosive damage, as well as you can use those enemies to target other enemies in the room if you're trying to use those explosives as extra damage on other monsters in the room. Another thing that kind of makes this nice is fire hives tend to spawn near doors and near each other. So sometimes you'll run into a string of like 2 or 3 fire hives. And if that's the case, you can kind of separate them out. Again, use that explosive damage to your advantage. The only time Interfury's passive kind of gets annoying is if you take it into the super late game where you're actually fighting the owl. Knocking the owl back every turn can be a little annoying simply because you only have so many turns to attack before the owl comes out of any stun that you apply to it. So I generally will keep these for a long time in my runs, but I'll tend to replace it with a legendary if I have the option. But overall, this item is great. I'd probably put it in A as well. I don't care about losing 1 attack if it means I don't have to worry about explosive enemies, and 3 points of speed, it's not bad. Oftentimes I probably won't care about it, but if I am building any speed, it's a nice pickup as well. Alrighty, next rare glove slot, we have Noxious Grasp. So Noxious Grasp is kind of an interesting item. So its passive reads on shuffle +2 poison to front cards. So basically, when you shuffle the room, the enemies that land in front of you, or the cards that land in front of you, will be poisoned for 2 points of poison, which is fine. It's okay. It's not really gonna like totally change your game. It gives you a couple points of attack, -4 HP, and plus 10% crit chance. Honestly, I don't pick this item up a whole lot, only because I don't know what's going to land in front of me that I'm going to poison. It could be a chest, which I wouldn't poison, or a potion, which you can't poison. Or it could be an explosive enemy that ends up kind of putting you in a weird position where you might have to take some explosive damage. If that explosive enemy only had 3 HP, and then you're stuck between a fire bead. It adds some randomness to your rooms, which, I mean, I guess shuffle does, just in itself, but the poison means it may, also be killing enemies that you didn't necessarily want to kill in a specific order or what have you. So I generally don't pick this up much. If you're really hurting for attack, that's usually when I'll pick it up, and if I have kind of an excess of HP, but it's definitely not my favorite. I'd probably pick up one of these other two, either Cold-Blooded or Haggler's Gloves, over Noxious Grasp, simply because I'm kind of banking on a couple of different chances, while also giving up a fair amount of health. Not a bad item, just doesn't tend to be my favorite. Alrighty, so next item is Quick Draw Gloves. So Quick Draw Gloves are kind of an interesting, they fall in an interesting subset of items that we've talked about a little bit already in some of the other tier lists, but basically after spell use you gain 1 speed, and the item itself gives you 1 attack and -2 speed. So this has an internal cooldown of 3 spells, so you need to use the spell 3 times in order to proc the passive. And obviously you also have the internal cooldown of the spells themselves. So if your book has 5 combat turns on it before you can use it again, you're looking at potentially 15 turns before this will actually proc and give you a point of speed. I tend to value this pretty low. I'm almost tempted to put it D, only because if I'm spending souls to get this, I'm spending 40 souls for 1 point of attack and -2 speed, and it's going to take me 30 turns potentially to earn that speed back, which is a bit of that's kind of a high cost for a stat that, again, tends to be my dump stat. So I'm probably going to put this at D for now, just because the value is kind of low. You can definitely make this work if you have like an unstable tome or some sort of really low cooldown book. It also does work with scrolls, so I guess it's not always going to be, those 15 turns if your book has 5 combat turns on it. So you can definitely speed this up a bit, but I usually value it pretty low. Again, I would probably I'd rather get 2 points of attack and some crit chance over 1 point of attack and maybe some speed in the future. So some people may like this more than me, but I'm going to put it at D for now. All right, last item is setting for the rare chests is Setting Grasp. So, Setting Grasp, the passive reads, after spell use, +2 petrify to front cards. And we can see here we get -2 attack, +2 defense, +2 HP. This is kind of an item that I use as like a placeholder, so I don't really consider the passive much. 2 petrify isn't usually going to make or break my day. There are other items that give small amounts of petrify that are better than this and lower rarity, so lower cost, obviously. Generally, I'm going to pick up this item if I need the tankiness, so the defense and the HP. It does kind of hurt to lose the attack on it, but obviously, if I'm picking it up, I'm already considering whether or not I need those points of attack. The passive is always, of course, going to have an internal cooldown of whatever your books are. So again, if it's 5 combat turns until your book recharges, this passive is going to have kind of that. It's going to absorb that 5-turn cooldown basically into its own passive. Again, spells do affect this, but I don't really consider the passive much on this item if I'm going to pick it up. It's basically just for the stats. So again, kind of middle of the line. I'll probably pick this up more often than I'll pick up Noxious Grasp, just because picking up defense and health together is pretty valuable in comparison to losing that 4 HP. But I'm definitely not seeking it out. All right, so on to our epic hand slots. So first is Power Glove. So Power Glove is honestly one item that I tend to pick up a lot, despite the fact that I don't often feel the effects of the passive. So the passive reads, intimidate creature on attack with a 40% chance. And it gives you +2 defense and +2 speed. So generally I'm picking this up. If I am picking this up, it's almost always for the defensive stat. And the passive always sounds good. However, with the way I play, I don't often benefit from it. So Intimidate basically negates whatever monsters you're attacking. It'll negate their attack. It'll skip their attack action if you intimidate them. The caveat to that is intimidating on the second. If you're the second in line to attack, it doesn't give you any benefit. So if you have lower speed than the opponent, you'll start the combat phase with the opponent. The opponent will attack you. You'll then attack back. And if you intimidate, it doesn't really matter, because the next combat phase you enter with that enemy, they're going to still attack you first, then you attack, and you may intimidate again. However, if you do build speed, then this item is really, really solid, because Intimidate is very strong, as it's basically, it's better than any amount of defense since you totally skip the opponent's attack. This does also work on bosses, so that can definitely be a useful tool regardless of which ending you're going. And you can also stack these percentages as multiple rolls, so there's other items that give that 40% chance to intimidate, so you can have several chances. So overall, very good item. I'm going to put it at A for now, because even if you're not utilizing the passive all that much, it still gives you 2 defense. It gives you the 2 speed, so maybe if this is your first purple you're picking up, you decide, all right, maybe I'll build a little bit of speed so that I can intimidate some creatures. Overall, I tend to enjoy picking up this item. Again, even if it's just for the defense, there's no drawback to picking it up. Otherwise, it's just a stat stick. So pretty solid all. All right, next item is Shadow Flate. Shadow Flate is an item that I probably don't pick up as much as I should. In my brain, I probably need to swap the value of Power Glove and Shadow Flate with the way that I play. But the reason that I don't is simply because of the stats. Excuse me. So when I see the stats, I'm like, oh, I want Power Glove because it has defense. And when I see the stats to Shadow Flate, I'm like, oh, I don't really want that because I don't build speed. However, the passive of Shadow Flate reads reduce piercing damage taken by 1. So that's the damage that you are unable to block with just defense. It's that parry chance damage, basically. So if an enemy, if you have an 80% chance to parry their 2 piercing damage, if you have these gloves, it'll reduce that piercing damage down to 1 if you fail the parry. So, definitely a solid passive. It's not crazy, but it's helpful. Considering you get some extra speed and HP, that's usually what I'm picking it up for, is the HP, and you know, the passive is just always active, so it'll save you it'll save you some HP on the way. But I don't typically seek this out. There's other purples in different slots that I generally, you know, would take over this. However, it's a nice filler item. A little bit of negative clarity on there can work for your benefit. If you're giving up 2 points of clarity, usually isn't the end of the world, but kind of middle of the line. So I'll leave that at B for now as well. All right, Touch of Decay. Touch of Decay is kind of a funny item. So the passive reads +1 poison to front cards on attack. So that's both front cards, which can be kind of handy. It's sort of like pseudo splash damage on your front card. If you're, say you're attacking the card on the left-hand side of your 2 front cards, it's damaging the enemy on the right-hand side by 1 poison every attack. It also gives you 4 HP and 5 dodge chance, which the dodge chance I pretty much just don't even pay attention to. It's nice if you're supplementing other dodge chance that you have built. 4 HP is definitely pretty nice, though. That's usually what I'm picking it up for. But the +1 poison can be helpful if you are running a curse build. So curse damage cannot kill, but if you have a form, any other form of damage that will allow you to kill that enemy in one combat phase, if you have enough curse damage to take them down to 1 HP. So let's say my just normal attack damage is going to hit for 3. My curse damage is going to hit for 15, but the enemy only has 10 health. My 3 normal damage will be applied first. My next 15 curse damage will be applied, but curse can't kill, so it'll drop the enemy down to 1 HP. And then if you have Touch of Decay, it'll give you the kill because that poison will also be applied after the combat phase has been resolved, which will obviously kill them because they'll be at 1 HP. Overall, again, kind of middle of the line. The passive is kind of situational, but the health is nice. So if I'm picking this up, it tends to be for the stats. And that's kind of where the B tier falls. Is either I'm picking these items up for stats, or they have a passive that sort of outweighs the negative stats, but I may or may not pick it up. So that's kind of why a lot of these items end up falling in. Alrighty, last epic item is going to be Vine Grip Gloves. Vine Grip Gloves are definitely pretty solid. The stats on it alone are enough to put it in A. 3 attack and 4 health are just great stats to be able to pick up for, you know, just picking up the item. And then, of course, passive reads guaranteed crit on ensnared creatures. So for any ensnare build, this becomes very, very potent. But even if you don't have ensnare in your build, I oftentimes will pick these up over other purple gloves, simply because the stats are too good to pass up. It's kind of like Power Glove, where even if the passive isn't necessarily proccing, the stats on them, there's no drawback from picking up these items, so sometimes I'll use them as a placeholder as I'm looking for better gloves in the future. Alright, so that squares away our epics. I think even after taking a look at some of these items now, I'm still pretty happy with where a lot of these lie. None of these are really game-changing besides Soul Stealer, at least from my perspective. Vine Grip Gloves can be, but again, we're talking about most builds as opposed to just one particular, you know, subset of builds. All right, so into our legendary gloves. So the first one is going to be Brewer's Gloves. Brewer's Gloves are actually pretty cool. I didn't give these gloves enough credit for a long time, simply because I'm just a glutton for defense. However, these items give -3 defense, 3 speed, and 5 HP, so you lose a little bit of that raw tankiness with the defense, but you gain some tankiness back with the extra HP. They also give 10% dodge chance, which once you start getting into 10% added secondary stats, I think is where you start to see more value in those secondary stats. But the passive is really where this item shines. So Brewer's Gloves, the passive reads, create a random potion on kill. And that's basically every... It shows as 4 combat turns here, which I believe is the case. No. Okay, so after actually reading the description on this, it shows as 4 combat turns, but it's actually for every 4 kills. That's what I thought it was. But anyways, so basically, every 4 kills, the enemy that you kill will drop a potion, which can be cursed or not. It can be small or large, so any selection of potion. However, it feels like it tends to drop a lot of large potion, like large non-cursed potions, but maybe that's just some recency bias. But either way, this is really great for sustain during boss fights or during, large rooms. So for instance, instability or embracing chaos, things like that. Brewer's Gloves can be really solid. Without other items, this isn't gonna totally blow away your run. It's not gonna completely enhance it. However, it's almost always going to supplement any build if you have the defense to give up, which by the end game, you should have a fair amount of defense built. And if you don't, then maybe you want to pick something else up, but it's still got quite a bit of value regardless. So I'd say that probably falls into A. All right, next is Deflection. Deflection is one of those blessed items that basically have nothing wrong with it. Deflection gives you everything you could ask for. It gives you attack, defense, speed, HP, 3 attack, 3 defense, 2 speed, 2 HP. Literally just a perfect item. And the passive reads plus 20% parry chance. So if you aren't already parrying everything for 80%, this will likely get you there if you have any other defense built. It goes with just about any build, I guess, unless you're intentionally dumping one of your stats. But again, we're talking about most builds. It's as all around as it gets. There's never, unless you're going for a specific build, there's never a reason not to pick this up. And the passive can definitely help as you're getting into the higher difficulties as well, because obviously the attack stat of enemies goes up, so you have to build more defense to build that parry chance, and just getting a flat 20% parry chance on top of what you already have is some pretty massive value. So I'd say that goes in S tier right up with Soul Stealer. I'll take Deflection just about over any other glove in the game for the most part, maybe besides Soul Stealer if I'm really hurting for souls, but yeah, Deflection is great. Alrighty, next legendary glove slot is Dual Wield. So Dual Wield gives us 2 attack, 4 speed, and 2 clarity. And the passive reads, target both front cards on attack. Now, this item is a little funny because it doesn't proc all item abilities on both front cards, even though you're targeting both of them on attack. So say you have Poison Sword, which applies 3 poison to an enemy when you attack them. If you have Dual Wield, it's only going to apply that poison to the actual enemy you click on. It won't apply that poison to both. Same thing with something like Screamer. Screamer will apply the chain lightning damage on the side of which you actually clicked. So if you click on the right front card, it'll send that chain lightning down the right. So it's a little weird in that way, but this item is great for just raw power, raw damage, just trying to blow through enemies that are in front of you. The only tricky thing about dual wield sometimes is it can make navigating around explosive enemies a little tricky, because you have no choice to turn this off, so you're forced to attack both front cards once you pick this up. So there is a heat of caution with dual wield, but for the most part, I'm almost always gonna, I don't know, I shouldn't say that, but if there's no other options and like I need to take something out of a gold chest, this is a pretty decent item to pick up, you know, in most cases. So I'm probably, again, man, is our A tier too bloated here? I kind of want to put it at A as well. It's a pretty good item. It can cause you some trouble, but once you pick it up, as long as you keep the passive in mind, it's definitely pretty solid. Next, we have Noxious Ambiance, which is kind of like an upgraded version of Noxious Grasp. And Noxious Ambiance actually gets just pretty significantly better than Noxious Grasp. So we get the +2 attack, +5 defense, and -2 speed. So pretty solid stats all around. And then the passive reads on shuffle +3 poison to all creatures. So as opposed to just front cards with Noxious Grasp, we get +3 poison to all creatures in the room after shuffling the room. So there's a couple of things going on here. First, we have to be able to shuffle the room. So if you have no shuffles, this is basically just a stat stick, which is still pretty good at that. And then, of course, after we shuffle the room, that's 3 poison damage, which ends up being 6 damage in total once you've, you know, let all those points of poison tick down. So it's not a tremendous amount of damage, but it's nice to kind of supplement your build if you don't have a ton of damage baked in already. If you are going a poison build, it's a great jumpstart to your poison. So, like I said, it has some applications that are better, has some applications where it doesn't work as much, but overall, it's still a really solid item. I'd probably put it at B, simply because I'm usually picking this up for the stats. I usually don't care too much about the passive because, again, that poison can kill things that can cause some trouble for you, especially at that point when it's doing a total of 6 damage. It can kill your some fire hives and things of that nature, which could cause you some problems. So I'd say it probably falls in B. You could argue the stats could bump it up to A, but like in comparison to Brewer's Gloves and Dual Wield, where the passive is guaranteed, you might just need to play around it. Whereas Noxious Ambiance, you know, if you don't have any more shuffles left, or if you have a room with no shuffles, you're not going to be able to use the passive. So that's why I would probably rank it under those. Alrighty, next item is Parting Gift. So Parting Gift gives us 3 attack, 3 defense, and 5 HP. So simply for a stat stick alone is incredible. And then the passive reads, on successful stealth, spawn a self-destructing fire bead, which will explode for 30 explosive damage. This item has saved me on some runs by itself, single-handedly. Its stats are fantastic. You really couldn't ask for too much more. I mean, it's giving you 11 positive points across 3 different skills, or 3 different stats. So it's got a lot of value just straight up. And then the passive, if you do have some stealth chance, can actually be really, really potent. The only thing that I've run into with this item that can be a little weird sometimes is like, if you're not paying attention to your stealth chance, or just the fact that like you could stealth, right? If that's not an active thought in your mind, like if you have, 12% stealth chance, you might not be thinking about the fact that, oh, I have this item that's going to spawn an explosive behind me. If it does proc kind of randomly like that, it can, again, pin you in a weird spot where, like, now I have an explosive behind me that's going to explode in 3 turns, because they do have a countdown. So if you have, if you happen to spawn one on a 12% chance that you weren't expecting, and you have fire beads, on the other side of where you spawned it from, it can kind of make for an artificial pinch where then you're in between a couple of explosive enemies. But overall, I'd say this item does more good than bad. I'd probably put it in A simply for the stats. Out of all of our gloves, it's got basically the best stat line besides deflection. So definitely really solid. I pick it up if there's no other options, simply for the stats alone. Alrighty, and final item is Phas Fiend. So, let me pull this guy up. So Phas Fiend gives us 3 attack, 10% crit chance, and 10% dodge chance. So overall, really solid stats. And then the passive reads Phas Fiend's... Oh, have I been saying Phas Fiend the whole time? It's Phas Friend. Phas Fiends are friendly and teleport you to the nearest other one. Dungeon spawn +3 Phas Fiend. Phas Fiends. Goodness. So basically what that means is it'll spawn some extra Phas Fiends in the room. And if you try to, like, quote unquote, attack a Phas Fiend, it'll teleport you to the next closest Phas Fiend. The one thing that's a little odd about this item is it's kind of like a... it kind of gives you basically wormholes between 2 particular Phas Fiends. So if you have 2 Phas Fiends that are particularly close, if you keep clicking on those Phas Fiends, it's always going to send you between the 2 closest, right? It's not like it's a random teleport. So I oftentimes kind of feel like the movement capacity of this item is kind of lackluster, and I'll generally be picking it up for the stats. There have been times when that teleportation to another Phas Fiend has, worked in my favor and, like, got me out of a sticky spot. However, being that I play with a lot of defense generally, if I'm relying on a Phas Fiend to save me when I'm in the, deep late game of a run, when I'm picking up legendary items, then so there's probably some other things going wrong in the run that lead me to, already be kind of in that bad situation. The stats are still solid, though. I'd say it probably falls in B simply because the passive's kind of situational. And although it does give good stats, 2 of them are secondary stats, which may already be so deep in the negatives that you don't really benefit from them. So I think it's kind of middle of the line. Again, if I'm picking it up, usually it's for the attack and crit as opposed to anything else. But still definitely pretty solid overall. Definitely no, like, dumpster fire hand slots. I think generally you've got kind of a lot, as you can kind of already tell, in this mid-range where it's like, yeah, I'll pick it up, whatever, it gives me some stats, maybe a passive that's helpful. But these 2, I believe, Soul Stealer and Deflection, stand above the rest by quite a significant margin. There are builds that will allow some of these others to shine pretty bright, like Brewer's Gloves, Fine Grip Gloves, stuff like that. Power Glove. But overall, after taking a second look at this, I think I'm pretty happy with where a lot of these fall. I might even drop Nightshade Wrap because I just don't like that item. Maybe it should stay, but I think I'm going to drop it down with Quick Draw Gloves because basically when I see this item in a chest, it looks like garbage. Like I re-roll right over it and don't even think twice. But anyways, that is your hand slot tier list for Ring of Pain. Definitely let me know what you think down in the comments, whether you agree, disagree. If you move stuff around, let me know, because I'm always interested in how you guys play and, what thoughts you might have on some of this stuff. But overall, I'd say a pretty strong slot out of all the available options we have. So that is it for now. We will catch you in the next one, and thanks for tuning in.